Okay, so today we're going to talk about multi-port valve technology or block design as it comes to critical pharmaceutical processes such as API production in modern pharmaceutical facilities, which really ties into this whole facilities of the future and generally speaking, automation and regulatory topics here at the ISPE virtual exhibition. So we're going to talk about a real life example that was basically built on Robelux technology that we purchased from Amersham, who in the 1990s was a division of GE Healthcare based out of Uppsala in Sweden, just north of Stockholm. Since then, we've developed that technology a bit more based on feedback from clients globally through our FSM network for people like myself, field segment managers, in 35 countries where we have a direct presence, either in manufacturing, subassembly, or just local service and support. As such, we've identified that there is a general shift occurring in the industry from batch processing to continuous processing. And overall, there's a wish to reduce waste and a surge of ingenuity in the market. So Martin at Zeta yesterday was talking about how concurrent processes in terms of engineering versus production instead of gated processes really allowed engineering to support and accelerate development of the US space program. In a similar way, we can see how that's really applied to Robelux technology and general block valve design. So generally speaking, we need to think differently. We need to approach problems from a different perspective if we're going to get the higher titers that we want to see out of our modern pharmaceutical processing facilities. We need to think a little more flexibly about hybrid systems and how do we integrate that single-use environments and multi-use environments, be they standard metallic or somehow polymeric. And we need to get more data. There's a general push for Industry 4.0. There was a really interesting presentations yesterday where we saw the folks from Sanofi talking about the facilities of the future and paperless design. Really, really cool stuff that absolutely is not possible without some level of Industry 4.0 automation. So we can see there's a general trend. It's clear, both from a mechanical and an automation standpoint, we need to think differently and we need to approach problems in a different way. So we'll talk a bit about that with a live example. So just a quick introduction, a nice little photo there from ISPE last year, the annual meeting, the bowling evening. It was a great time. Myself there with some friends, Vincent Roca out of Philadelphia who works for Burkhardt, and some friends from CSL Behring. So I just want to thank them and everyone else at ISPE for setting that up. We always have a great time and we're a proud supporter of the ISP in all their endeavors. So myself, Andrew Lamora, I've got 19 years of experience with networks, automation controls, and generally speaking, the pharmaceutical market. And as an ASME BPE Executive Committee and Standards Committee member and the chairperson of process instrumentation, I think I share a unique perspective with some of the presenters yesterday that were talking about regulatory environments and standardization. As my background is IT with a minor in microelectronics. So from my perspective, I see that the integration and standardization of networks is crucial as we move into a new world of Industry 4.0. In addition to that, I'm responsible for the development and strategic direction of Burkhardt as in the hygienic segment in the US. And I'm a consultant for global and local R&D projects and overall portfolio development. A former ISP Canada board chair and a craft brewing enthusiast. So fermentation, which is kind of fun and what we'll talk about a little bit today. Okay, chromatography. What is chromatography? In short, in the production of vaccines, therapies, and other treatments such as cancers, they do depend heavily on a chromatography step. And effectively what it is a filtration step that isolates proteins in a very pure way through a resin bed, either positively through attraction or negatively through repulsion. So this is what they talk about, positive capture versus negative capture. And it retains those for further purification steps. Facilities are being challenged, generally speaking, to do more with fewer resources and less space. Do more with less. Who hasn't heard that, really? And this is a really good example, chromatography, of a really critical process and how you can maybe think about it a little bit more differently to get a better result for your customers and ultimately the patient. So if we follow this PFD, we can see that the following fermentation and other upstream processes feed into cell harvest, product separation, and then into a chromatography step, which is followed by some filling, probably some filtration, I would presume, and then product fill and finish into vials or some such packaging. And the target substances, the things that you're looking for are your antibodies, your peptides, your oligonucleotides, and your basic pharmaceuticals, protein-based, things of immunoboosters. These are the things that you're really trying to capture typically with a chromatography process. So in a chromatography process example, you would have multiple buffers that would feed in. So we've listed them here as mediums. They would feed into a chromatography manifold that would separate from the process to a waste product depending on the conductivity spikes in the process. Multiple buffers may be introduced to the process, which then goes through the chrome columns. It basically separates the good from the bad, as to not overcomplicate it. So if we were to look at the heart of that system, which is known as a chromatography cluster or a chrome block, in the traditional approach in the 1990s, this would be very common. You would see 4 valves basically fabricated together to form a cross or a T. And this would be made by welding 4 different two-way valves together. If we then take a simple example and put some numbers to this, and we say, okay, what if that product has an inherent value of 100,000 euros per milliliter? That the holdup volume, the amount of liquid that's trapped between the weirs in a static condition, would equate to 90 milliliters. So again, an easy calculation, easy figures. $90,000 of product could potentially be held up as dead volume between the weirs following any step of the chromatography process. So that could be lost. And this is in addition to cleaning concerns and other pre and post processing optimization issues, so flow path characteristics and so forth. So this is the way it had been done for years. Then in the 90s, the industry evolved to a conventional block. So then we start to look at a machined block of metal that is machined with industry compliant material, ASME BPE typically, but in other countries it could be different standards. The holdup volume that would be present between the weirs in a static condition equates to about 53 milliliters in this example, which would calculate to a direct cost of 53,000 euros of potential dead volume between the weirs, so wasted product in each step of the process. That's aside from cleaning and flow characteristics, but with a block valve, another variable that gets thrown at you is the ability to sanitize, to do a sip process. Getting a temperature of 121 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes becomes exceptionally difficult when you have a giant piece of metal that effectively becomes a heat sink. So there's that to figure and consider as well, and maybe the stress on auxiliary systems that are farther from the coldest point in the system, which is typically the chrome block. But a straight up cost there, 53,000 euros, is pretty common. So from our perspective, we said, all right, well, how do we look at this from a different angle? Could we get smarter about machining the weirs? Could we somehow pitch them or angle them? Yeah, we could do that. Or we can maybe think about technology that we purchased before in the 1990s. This was made for this. How do we take the lessons we've learned? How do we apply that information that we've gathered, that data that we've accumulated over the years, and really apply it to this problem? So what we said, all right, well, we did some research with our A&Es, our OEMs, our end user customers, and we said, all right, how do we take all this information and innovate our block valve design? How do we somehow approach this from a different perspective? So when we applied this Robelux technology to a standard block, we started to really see some interesting developments. In addition to a smoother flow profile, you also get drastically reduced raw metal, which means their heat up and cool down times are significantly reduced. And on top of that, we are able to integrate some level of Industry 4.0 automation, so an ASI interface, and apply this either in a centralized, distributed, or decentralized automation model. And the next bit that got really interesting for us is globally, we see a push for higher concentration buffers. So hotter processes, but more aggressive processes, meaning that chromatography systems built in AL6XN, Hastelloy, 14429 are becoming more and more common. So as you reduce the cost of that metal, then you reduce the cost of the piping that attaches to it. So it becomes really, really interesting to our customers when they say, okay, not only is it more cost effective, it flows better, and it's much smarter from many perspectives. But probably the one that hits home the most is the holdup volume. The reduction of holdup volume, and with a similar case study, the case study we talked about earlier, drops to 22 milliliters. So a total cost of 22,000 euros using that same $100,000 per milliliter example. And depending on which system you're going from, either a traditional cross or a block solution, that can be half to 4 times less holdup volume in that system, in addition to the smoother flow profile and the ability to not heat sink, to not become a giant radiator block. So that really, really helps improve the process, reduce manufacturing time, but straight up cost in terms of dead volume. As an ancillary benefit, and honestly one that wasn't top of mind, it reduces the overall footprint of the valve assembly itself. So going from across, you can see that it takes up a fair amount of space, and that's not counting the mechanical and the utilities to get to that, so cable trays and the like. Then you look at, okay, what if we take that and move it into a block, so we reduce that mechanically, so we get a nice design that reduces it a little bit, but not terribly so. Still takes up a pretty significant amount of space in that UFO type layout. But then when we move to a Robelux design and go to a back-to-back solution, it's extremely compact, which means that the entire skid in some cases can shrink. And that becomes really, really cool. And it's interesting, the feedback we get the most from our clients is more that they didn't know this was even possible and this technology existed. So it became difficult for them to kind of wrap their head around the flow pass. And that's a direct quote from a good friend, client in the industry, an end user customer. And he said, once I got my head around the flow pass and how this worked in an extra axis, I really started to see how this could benefit the overall process design and really reduce the risk in my system. Another ancillary benefit, which is kind of obvious, but honestly, those things often get overlooked. Just from a pure maintenance perspective, the handling costs and carrying costs of consumable spares is reduced in half because you've effectively got a 2-in-1 actuator. So as you probably can piece together on your own, if you look at that assembly and say, oh, okay, well, instead of going from 1 block to 2 blocks, in addition to my entry time, my logistics, so an overall time requirement, you're looking at about a savings of 12 hours. So in most operating environments, a day and a half, not counting gowning and all these other sorts of things. So real definite straight up cost savings in terms of reduction of maintenance, trainings of teams and so forth. So really, really interesting when it comes to that. And how does all this technology roll in? How does it apply? Well, here's a really good example. So we've had a number of customers use this technology to give them a differentiator in the market, something that really translates into value for their end user customers. One really good example is YMC, who not only changed to Robelux designs for the harder systems, those Chrome blocks, but they also applied a continuous processing model and some really clever Pharma 4.0, Industry 4.0 programming to their systems on top of that. And this makes for not only a really technologically advanced system, but something that really helps the customers push the envelope in terms of higher titers and the overall attractiveness of their facility, which you wouldn't think is something that's important, but when you speak to CMOs and CDMOs, where the plant floor is actually a sales tool for them, because let's face it, everyone wants their pharmaceutical products to be made in a nice, clean, good-looking environment. When you walk in, you see a system like this that produces 2 to 4 times as much as a traditional system just by being clever with technology. That's really cool. That's someone that you want to give a contract to. So these systems can run in either a parallel mode or continuous mode. And again, the team from YMC, there's a hyperlink there. You can connect with them and they can explain in a bit more detail. But essentially what you're doing is going from continuous processing or parallel mode to run in a batch process to either double up on the volume or to go to a continuous 100% uptime model, which is really, really interesting for any chromatography process, which is often the bottleneck of the entire manufacturing steps, aside from the obvious fermentation. Another interesting trend that the team at YMC identified and adapted to was a hybrid system. So in terms of flexibility for these CMOs and CDMOs, they wanted to give them the ability to use buffers in a disposable package or in a traditional stainless, a multi-use stainless, or to somehow use for final product to move to disposable technology or single-use technology for the final products. So what they've done is they've adapted this multi-use technology to a hybrid system using links connectors, and a really, really interesting approach, which I think is going to be the trend in the market as things kind of roll out and develop. So it allows them to be more modular, flexible, and adaptable for either new or innovative products or processes, but to also, generally speaking, either increase the production of the facility or to react more quickly to a change in the market, say in the current scenario, vaccine production for COVID-19 treatment. And how does all that Industry 4.0 information come across? How does that get into the shop floor? Well, we've spoken about Industry 4.0 and Pharma 4.0 over the last few days, a little bit. The good news is that the industry is conservative, which is maybe not necessarily the first thing that jumps to mind, is being conservative and not adopting new technology first, being risk averse. But the good news is that the industry has waited so long that now there are so many more options available that are tried and true. For instance, Ethernet IP modulating control positioners fitted to diaphragm valves that are made for continuous batch processing, made to be a control valve, not back-ended or somehow retrofitted. So really cool time in terms of technology development. So you can get efficiencies and cost savings. As we discussed yesterday, the presentations from Christian from Wirem and Mr. Bruce Kane specifically spoke about the raw cost savings for automating a system. The flexibility to design becomes a real possibility. What information is cyclic, which information is acyclic? How do you interpret that data? What do you do with it? Well, when you have 72 points for a limit switch of data that you can analyze, that becomes really cool. What you can do in terms of scheduling maintenance by requirement, analyzing data, rather than doing traditional, generally accepted best practices or rules of thumb, as they say, going to some sort of data-driven maintenance or overhaul replacement strategy on your system becomes much more of a possibility. In addition, the reduction of risk and dependency on site personnel, as we are in a current environment where site teams and labor is becoming more and more of a problem. When you automate a system with any kind of technology, it becomes more repeatable, more precise output, easier to validate, easier to qualify, and overall more dependable for a final safe product. So the push is pretty clear, the need of the market is pretty clear, and the ability and the technology available in the market is really out there. So thinking outside the box in that initial concept and engineering phase becomes more and more critical. So to kind of wrap up and summarize, we went through a lot of information today. That was a lot in a very short time, but I want to be respectful of your time. Myself and the team at Burkert felt that this was kind of a bit of enough information to act as a bit of a teaser for our automation and water OEM and steam engineering academies, which are 2 days and take place once a year down in our Huntersville facility in North Carolina, in Charlotte, North Carolina. We do offer these sessions free of charge, and currently, due to the COVID-19 implications, they are pushed to January 2021 in our 180,000 square foot manufacturing center and North American headquarters. And it's a good mix of hands-on and theory in a mixed setting, and you'll be working with people and your peers in the industry, end users, maintenance techs, right across the board. So you get a lot of cross-discipline action happening, a lot of good laughs, some good social time, but a good mix of hands-on and theoretical to keep you appraised of the most current technology. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and just reiterate that either myself or area sales managers such as Stan Cushy and Vincent Roca are always happy, ready, willing, and able to draw on their global experiences, such as the example with YMC, to help you with your problems in difficult applications such as this. So the relevant support materials are also available at our virtual booth, so please feel free to drop by, grab anything you want, and we'll be monitoring the live chat. So feel free to jump in there, say hello, or give us a call. Our contact information is also posted there.